Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to English Guru. Today we will discuss narrative poetry and the elements of narrative poetry. One fine morning, a mother kangaroo was worried. As her son was missing, in confusion, she hurried. The poet told us a story in a poetic form. This form of poetry is called narrative poetry. A poetry which tells us a story in detail, that is called as narrative poetry. Now let's discuss the elements of narrative poetry. A narrative writing tells a story. Narrative writing has a setting. It has a topic sentence that states your opinion. Narrative writings has sequential order. It has beginning, a middle, and an end. It can be real or a make-believe. Now let's discuss some of the elements of story. A story has always a setting. A setting is where and when the story took place. Then there are main characters who the story is mostly about. There is a beginning in which the main characters are introduced and the setting is described. And there is middle where the main events happen and the problem is introduced. And in the end the problem is solved and the story comes to an end. Same is for narrative poetry, as narrative poetry always tell a story. The main idea of a text. The main idea is the most important idea of the text. It is usually explained in a sentence or two. When you look at this picture, what do you see? You simply see a burger. This is the main idea. While the details are information given more about the burger, like what is included in it. It has salad, it has sauce, it has a patty, etc. etc. These are the details. The first element of narrative poetry is a narrative writing tells a story. One fine morning, a mother kangaroo was worried. As her son was missing, in confusion, she hurried. The poet told us a story in a poetic form. This form of poetry is called narrative poetry. A poetry which tells us a story in detail, that is called as narrative poetry. The second element of narrative poetry is narrative writing has a setting. Have you ever thought that whenever you start a story, it always begins with once upon a time? Why does it always begin with once upon a time? Because in the beginning of the story, its setting is described. The setting is where it happened, when it happened, and then the characters or the participants of the story are described. Like in this story, once upon a time there lived a princess named Monica. Here in this story, once upon a time shows the time and there shows the place. And Monica is the participant or the character of this story. Now we'll go through some more examples of character and settings. As I told you, a story always have characters and settings in the beginning. Settings are when and where the story happened. And characters are also called as participants. They are the creatures, animals, and people of the story. In order to understand the character and setting of a story in a better way, I have a picture for you. You will have to go through the details and tell me about the participants, setting of the story, and also what is happening in that picture. Here's the picture. Let's go through the details first. I can see a boy. I can see some trees. I can see a treasure map in his hand. I can see the sea. I can see the beach. And I can see a bottle hidden in the sand. So what do you think is happening in this picture? I think the boy is on the beach for a treasure hunt. And he found a hidden bottle in the sand. It must be his first clue. The setting is when and where that happened. When is the once upon a time and where is on the beach. Then the character, any person, animal or figure in a story. So here the character is a boy. The third element of narrative poetry is it has a topic sentence that states your opinion. One fine morning, a mother kangaroo was worried. A topic sentence is a line or sentence at the beginning of a stanza or paragraph, which gives the idea of the paragraph. In the first two lines of this stanza, the poet gave her or his opinion about the kangaroo, that the mother kangaroo was worried. So the poet gave his or her opinion that the mother kangaroo was worried. So in the poem, later we will come to know why she was worried and was there any solution to her problem. The fourth element of narrative poetry is narrative writings has sequential order. The fifth element of narrative poetry is it has beginning, a middle and an end. I have a picture for you. Can anyone tell me what happened first? First, the tadpoles hatched from the eggs. Then the tadpoles grew into a frog. So this is called a sequence of events, and every story has a sequence of events, as well as the narrative poetry. Narrative poetry also have a sequence of events. They have a beginning, middle and end. Events happen in order. Words like first, then, next or last may be used to tell the events in order. Like every story, narrative writing has a beginning, middle and end. The sixth element of narrative poetry is it can be real or a make-believe. It means that the story can be about a real event or it can be a made-up story. Let's go through an example of narrative poetry. Two little kittens. Two little kittens one stormy night began to quarrel and then to fight. One had a mouse and the other had none, and that was the way the quarrel had begun. The old woman took the sweeping broom and swept them both right out of the room. The ground was covered with frost and snow. They had lost the mouse and had nowhere to go. So they lay and shivered beside the door till the old woman finished sweeping the floor. And then they crept in as quiet as mice, all wet with snow and as cold as ice. They found it much better that stormy night to lie by the fire than to quarrel and fight. Do you know who the narrator of the poem is? A narrator is someone who tells a story. In narrative poetry, the narrator is the poet. If you look at the bottom of your page, you will find the name of the poet, so that is your narrator. Here the narrator is Jane Taylor. Now let's see if our poetry has these elements. Was it telling a story? Yes, of course it was. Did it have setting? Setting is the time and place of a story. Yes, it had setting. The time and place was mentioned. Does it had a topic sentence? Yes, it had. Was it written in a sequential order? Yes, it was. It has a beginning, middle and end. Was it real or make-believe? It was a make-believe. If you observe, every stanza of these poems describes an event. The first stanza shows the setting and the kittens are introduced. The place and time is also mentioned. In the second stanza, the problem is introduced. The problem was that only one of them had a mouse and they were fighting over it. Then there is a sequence of events, and in the end you will come to know about the solution of the problem. The events were that as they were fighting, the old woman just swept them away of her house. They were very cold and shivering outside, and when they came back, they decided never to fight again. This was the solution to their problem.